On the birth anniversary of Prophet Muhammad, the Iranian supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, decided to offend one of Iran's few remaining friends, India. The supreme leader of theocratic Iran clubbed Indian Muslims with those in Gaza and the Rohingyas of Myanmar. He posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, that the condition of Indian Muslims is similar to the Muslims of Gaza and, of course, Myanmar. Now, needless to say, this has caused a storm in India. India has condemned the statement and responded in very strong words. India said, and I quote, "We strongly deplore the comments made regarding minorities in India by the supreme leader of Iran." Now, the question that needs to be asked at this point in time is why Iran's supreme leader said what he said. Because surely there is no reasonable basis to compare the condition of Muslims living in Gaza, which is facing the Israeli onslaught, and the Rohingyas of Myanmar. Also, what about Iran's own track record? Were these comments made because of growing India-Israel ties or for some other reasons? To talk about all that, I'm joined by Burzeen Wagmar from Center for Iranian Studies, SOAS, University of London. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Wagmar.
Good afternoon, Mr. Singh.
Before anything, your first comment, because clearly Iran, when it comes to its own track record of its treatment of its minorities, whether it's Sunni minorities or we are talking about minorities of other religion, because there is a considerable number of Jewish minority also in Iran, which lives in Iran. What about its own track record?
Well, where do I begin is the question as a historian. Let's say April 1995, when President Rafsanjani made a state visit to India and declared on record in his visit to Lucknow Hussainiya, a Shia shrine, that India is a model of secularism. And the late President Rafsanjani was the very individual, Mr. Singh, who stage managed Khamenei's entry into the post of supreme leader upon Ayatollah Khomeini's death in June 1989. So Khamenei would do well to realize what President Rafsanjani had to say. And on that very visit, Mr. Singh, when he returned to Delhi in the presence of Prime Minister Rao, Rafsanjani checked a Pakistani journalist who intended to bring up the Kashmir question and India's putative treatment of its Kashmiri Muslim minorities. And Rafsanjani very robustly shut that Pakistani correspondent down, not because of a question of being diplomatic, but because he maintained that India does know how to conduct itself with its own minorities, not just Muslims. Now, in the question of Iran, you have to realize with an Islamic republic that is not just a theocracy, but is unabashedly discriminatory per its constitution, which came about with the inception of the Islamic Republic in 1980. Where there is a distinct us versus them maintained in all walks of life, formally and informally speaking, through legislation for Muslims and non-Muslims. Tehran is the largest metropolis in West Asia, home to about 18 to 19 millions. There is no Sunni mosque in Tehran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. So if Sunnis wish to pray in an Islamic republic, get this, they have to perforce visit a Shia mosque. There are differences, subtle differences between how Shias and Sunnis conduct their 5 daily prayers. So the question is, why is there no license afforded for Sunnis as a minority in Iran to have a mosque in their capital city? That brings me to Balochistan, which is Iran's restive province. Also, like Pakistan, it is Iran's largest province in physical landmass and the most impoverished of all Iranian provinces, and also is home to Iran's largest Sunni Muslim minority. On all parameters, it lags behind the rest of the Islamic Republic. And ever since the protests for veiling which occurred with the death of Mahsa Amini,
Mr.
Kurds,
Wagmar,
yes,
we will talk about all of those issues because you've raised several key important points. But before we do that, what I also want to understand is the timing of this statement, because this has come in,
exactly.
of course, not just at the birth anniversary of Prophet Muhammad. This is also the second, anniversary of what
Anniversary.
happened with Mahsa Amini. But even before that, the thing that I really want to understand is why would he say what he said? Because India really is one of the few friends, despite the pressure from the West, despite the pressure from US and Europe to stop buying oil from Iran, India continued to do so, right? And at this point in time, the only reason which I can see, because of which perhaps the Iranian Supreme Leader said what he said, is perhaps because of the fact that the India-Israel ties have grown significantly since the Modi government has come in power in 2014. And of course, we are in the third term of Modi government at this point in time in India. So from that perspective, do you think it is come in because Iran at this point in time feels cornered? And it
Very much.
wants to, because you also spoke about the Muslim Ummah, and wants to galvanize the support of Muslims from across the world.
It does, because at home it's a discredit regime, and it can only galvanize and find some standing for itself abroad by whipping up sentiments on not just Gaza, but also Kashmir, on which Khamenei has spoken after the revocation of Article 317
Yes.
a few years ago. He was the first to pipe up about it. Not just Pakistan, he did so. And Supreme Leader Khamenei has a pattern about talking about the plight of Indian Muslims at consistent occasions. And partly this fits in with New Delhi's burgeoning security and intelligence relationship and defense relationship with Jerusalem, ever since India recognized Israel in 1992. Formally speaking, and more so also the fact that the Abraham Accords have been signed by Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates with Israel, which of course calls into question Khamenei's standing. That is why he had to bring this up, and which is why he tends to do so, despite the fact, as he pointed out, that Iran is, for all purposes and intents, a pariah. It has supplied Putin with weapons in Ukraine to murder Ukrainians when there is no strategic interest involved. It has also provided IRGC commanders, Mr. Singh, who are on ground in occupied Crimea, dictating and working alongside Russian forces. Now, you'd ask, why again? What has Ukraine done to Iran too? What has India done? In fact, India has had a very strategic relationship with Iran, at least insofar as trade is concerned, and it has maintained trade despite the lifting of sanctions. And yet, Iran has not necessarily been grateful. Can I just bring in one point before we get back to other aspects? In that,
Sure.
What is threatening here to me, insofar as I'm concerned, coming from Iranian studies, is the $3.2 billion 20,000 crore rupee UCO Bank Calcutta scam that has been ongoing since 2016 because of the Indo-Iranian trade deal and for rupee real trade that was started, and that Indian importers of oil are now paying and Iranians are depositing in UCO and IDBI Bank in India, which your Indian Reserve Bank of India has permitted them to do so. And this slush of rupee funds is something that should be raised as disquieting, to say the least, in terms of what Iran could use those funds for and fund activities in India. I have seen nothing of the sort on the side of the Indians, quite frankly, who are sanguine about it. Do they even realize the implications? Because Iran is a regional destabilizer, and they are masters of instability insofar as the Near East is concerned. We not just with Saudi Arabia, but with riots in Bahrain and with problems in Kuwait and the UAE and others, not to mention Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. What is to say that Iran would not have its eyes on India at some point later in the future, especially with access to such a large slush of rupee funds? That needs to be factored in as such, which has not been brought into any discussion, any whatsoever aspect at the diplomatic or even at the media level, insofar as I've seen from India.
Thank you for pointing that out. But I really want to go back to this particular statement and also want to point out hypocrisy of Iran, because we are talking about times wherein Uyghur Muslims continue to be discriminated against by one of Iran's key allies, that is China in this case, and Iran has not said much about it.
A studied silence is what you find from Tehran. And from what my reading of Persian sources is that somehow Tehran, or at least parts of Tehran officialdom, have bought into Beijing's narrative, which purports that these are not just dissidents, but terrorist takfiri elements. And the moment you use the word takfiri, Mr. Singh, in the
Yeah.
Iranian context, in Iranian parliaments, that sets alarm bells to them because it evokes ISIS and the Taliban and the ISIS Khorasan, who are, of course, unabashedly Sunni fanatics out to decimate Shia. Now, that is a fact. Nobody's denying that. And Tehran has legitimate interests in not just protecting its own Shia, but also speaking as a moral force for Shia across the rest of Asia and elsewhere. I can understand that. But for Beijing to paint Sunni Uyghurs as Takfiri forces strains credulity because it is a minority which is under heavy surveillance and has been interned and undertaken, has been compelled to undergo doctrinal brainwashing and ideological straitjacketing by the Chinese state. And Iran, like so many other Muslim countries across the OIC, due to their ties and the fact that they are in hock to Beijing over trade, have turned a Nelson's eye to the matter, which of course only vindicates the hypocrisy and yet once again, as far as I'm concerned, confirms the point, namely this. It is so very easy to discredit, to criticize transparent, democratic polities like India, Israel, the US, or UK for iniquities or for omissions and commissions. But for repressive regimes like Iran, where there's no accountability, they can afford to cock a snook at us, but they can get away by not talking about those who share their authoritarian worldview, namely whether China or Russia, and Russia's treatment of its own Chechen Muslims under Putin. It has had nothing to say about that. And of course, there is also the further hypocrisy that Iran has a very sound relationship, one of the few ones in the region, with Armenia, essentially a Christian country. And here Iran finds itself at loggerheads with Azerbaijan, a Muslim polity. So somehow Iran is willing to sell the Azeris down the creek in order to maintain their relations with Yerevan. So it just goes to show that Tehran can blow hot, blow cold, but there is nothing consistent, genuine, or sincere in their attempts at speaking for the Muslim Ummah as a whole.
Nothing genuine or sincere. And that's the thing with such comments, right? It ends up opening the Pandora's box. There are so many things. We were talking about it earlier, of course, and we'll go back to it now. When you make a comment like that, you're literally opening the door for people to scrutinize, look at you, look at your own track record. So this is, of course, also...
India is home to the oldest Iranian diaspora in the world, the Zoroastrians, who have flourished in the subcontinent. Khamenei must surely be aware of it, if not his advisors. Point number one. Point number two, India, the Indian Republic, is home to the largest 12er Shia Ithna Ashari population in the world too. And Tehran does know that much more so than the Zoroastrian factor that I brought up, and that Indian Shia have had no issues. In fact, and when we talk about...
By the way, Zoroastrians are really a minority. I mean, they're a very small segment of the overall Indian 130, 140 crore population.
They are just barely 54,000 in the Indian Republic, which stands at about 1.6 billion. And they have flourished in more ways than one that Khamenei could ever dream of talking about. But even putting that aside, let's talk about Indian Shia. Mr. Singh, insofar as the insurgency which began after 87-88 in Kashmir, that insurgency in the main saw disgruntled Kashmiri elements leave the valley for training in Pakistani camps, as we know. But here's the nub. In every instance, if you were to statistically undertake this for, as Kashmir studies specialists point out to me, and anyone in Srinagar would point out to you, the said individuals who have gone across, exfiltrated out of India, they're all Sunnis. How is it that Kashmiri Shia in downtown Srinagar, Anantnag, or elsewhere in the valley don't pelt stones at Indian forces, don't have an issue with the Indian government, don't have an issue with the Indian Article 370's repealing? It is always Sunnis who happen to be the disgruntled element and have galvanized this so-called insurgency movement. No Shia have ever been involved. So what is Khamenei on about? Because his basic strategic interest worldwide is to be a moralizing force and mouthpiece for global Shia as such. And clearly Indian Kashmiri Shia hold no truck with his views of how Delhi conducts itself with the Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Likewise, in Ladakh, there is a Shia population. Tibetan Shia in Ladakh, historically speaking, are Shia. They're not Sunni, just as they are in Gilgit-Baltistan in Pakistan's northern
Other side of the
areas.
border.
So there are no Sunnis there. They are historically a Shia population. And the ones in Gilgit-Baltistan have faced discrimination over the years, but Khamenei has nothing to say about that. And Ladakhi Shia, you don't find Sunnis in downtown Leh, have had no issue with New Delhi. So again, one wonders, what is Khamenei on about when he rakes up the Kashmir issue as a red herring?
Right. And now let's go back to what you were talking about. Of course, this is Mahsa Amini's death's second anniversary. We all know how she died. We all know how the regime treated that movement, which of course started after her death. So if you could now go back to that moment and talk to us a little bit about, in recent years, what we have seen in terms of how Iran treats women, of course LGBTQ, and if at all, what it has done over the last few years, of course, is that the regime at this point in time is feeling threatened. It's feeling all kinds of pressure from all sides. It's not very popular, as you were also saying earlier. So what about its track record in recent years? And then, of course, we will talk about its deportation of the Afghani Pashtuns from Iran about 500,000 2 years ago, and the plan to deport about 2 million.
Yes. Following Ms. Amini's death, the riots that broke out across Iran saw the entire Iranian population galvanized against what I have iterated as a discredited regime of obscurantists and a lash out at what is male patriarchy. And that saw both Iranian Muslims and non-Muslims, Shia, Sunni, Zoroastrians, Jews, Christians, Baha'is, so on and so forth. What happened in the aftermath of that is important. Iran said that Zionists have aided and abetted street protests and lumpen elements to go on rampage across the streets of Iranian provincial cities. Well, again, we know that is absolute nonsense because there are no Zionists to do that. But what did occur is that over 20,000 deaths have occurred in Iran of Iranian citizens shot dead in cold blood by the Iranian security forces. The Iranian security forces have rampaged across mosques in Zahedan and across, that is in Iran and Balochistan, and in Kurdistan, and attacked Iranian Sunni elements who are mere bystanders to what is happening and have not aided or abetted anything but merely killed them. Iran has fired missiles into Iraqi Kurdistan, attacking Iraqi Kurdish Sunni minorities. So much for the sanctity of Iraqi sovereignty and airspace, and has done that in the last 2 years. So that tells you about a government which has absolutely no compunction in shedding the blood of its own citizenry. That needs to be put into context. A highly beleaguered, insecure regime digging its heels in, which has no credibility, even after the recent election of a so-called moderate, and that hope has gone sour immediately because President Pezeshkian has no say. He's a titular head because all decisions ultimately lie with Supreme Leader, the Rahbar, as he's known, Khamenei. There is not a single minority in President Pezeshkian's cabinet.
So you're saying a reformist getting elected does not change Iran and what Iran is all about much.
It was musical chairs. It was a sop given to the populace in the wake of these riots for the last 2 years that Dr. Pezeshkian, he's a cardiologist by training, was permitted even to enter the fray of the polls. Polls which would never take place had the president not and the foreign minister not died in that air crash. So that needs to be put into context, and he is titular. That is the same thing we saw about 1.5 to 2 decades ago when President Khatami came to power and hopes were raised that Iran would turn a page. Nothing of the sort. The regime is out to just give out these cosmetic gestures. Nothing will come of it because it is a strong state and is determined to continue its way of life and its vested interests with the Iranian intelligence, the deep state, the IRGC, and the Bazari Shia element, the conservative faction of the population. But of course, they too are now increasingly questioning Khamenei, who is 84 and ailing with cancer in remission for so many years, and what would be the fate of the republic once he passes?
Now, while preparing for this interview, I was looking at reports of, human rights violation and, of course, the condition of minorities in Iran. There were so many. The number of reports were in the hundreds, if not thousands, right? So at one point in time, I thought it will be useless for me to quote one report after another. There is no point because more or less all the reports are saying the same thing.
And it's
But a few
depressing. It
issues.
is absolutely depressing when you see how Baha'is are treated in Iran just as Ahmadis are in Pakistan. Their life and security and standing is completely can be forfeited in a moment's notice by the state. They can be snuffed out in broad daylight on a street and nobody will lift a finger or dare to say anything. Slightly better off, if you can even put it in relative terms, is Iran in Jewry. And Jews have been in Iran for millennia, and the regime controls and connives to just suppress them. All Iranian Jews were forced to come to vote for the recent elections. If those and the elections didn't see a 10% turnout of the electorate in terms of the ratings at the polls, but Iranian Jews were under pressure to turn up for the polls, whether you like it or not. We know this for a fact in the last 2 months, which has now percolated into the West. And the same applies when Ahmadinejad used to go to the UN General Assembly on his September shindigs to talk about how Iran is. He would fly in with Zoroastrian, Jew, and Christian representatives. They were forced to board the aircraft with him to come and show as a sop that Iran is a multicultural, multi-ethnic society at peace with itself, and it's a peaceful one, and all of that nonsense. So we do know how minorities are treated in Iran. So there is no denying that aspect. They do what they are told. Otherwise, they know what's in store for them, but the representatives know what's in store for their beleaguered populations. And I've also pointed out about Sunnis in Iran and how they are treated. And not just that, Mr. Singh, also, this might interest your viewers to note, Sufis, even if they're Shia Sufis, the fact that they are Sufis who pray and have meditation exercises and just meet in hospices, not mosques, but just in prayer, silent meetings like meditative exercises, which Sufis tend to undertake, they are beaten up. Their beards are cut off. They are tracked by Iranian intelligence forces. Now you'd ask yourself, they're Shia, they're not even Sunni, they're not even non-Muslim. But why again? It is a highly insecure regime which feels threatened by any form of organization, which could be a distinct constellation of loyalties apart from the regime, which demands ruthlessly from its citizens. And the Sufis are no threat at all. I mean, what were Sufis going to do, for example? But they've been beaten up when they come out of their evening meditation exercises, and returning home and that sort of thing. They're trailed by security agents. So, like everyone and anyone finds the Islamic Republic of Iran a living hell. And I'm determined to point that out. It is a living hell for each and every one of its denizens today as we speak. Iran is the last country on earth who should be talking about minority rights or about the welfare of its subjects, where it has failed abysmally as an Islamic republic since its inception in 1979, 40 plus years on.
Right. And since we have spoken about most of the minorities in Iran, I think it'll be unfair to wrap this up without talking about the condition of Pashtuns living in Iran. And of course, the fact that Iran has deported 480,000, roughly speaking, of Afghanis in 2022, and it has plans to deport many more. So if you could throw some light on the condition of Afghanis living in Iran.
Thank you for bringing me back to that question, because like I said, Iran is a heterogeneous society, and it's not just confessional minorities, which I have spoken about given my specialization, but there are ethno-linguistic minorities too. Baluchis, Kurds, and of course the Pashtun population, which has been there since the Afghan civil war and the Soviet occupation era. And they are, of course, in a pitiful state in that they provide, traditionally speaking, blue-collar labor, and primarily in the construction sector. Let me put it this way to you. Remove the Pashtun, or as you say it in the Indian context, Pathan element from construction sites on any given day in Tehran, and all construction will come to a grinding halt because they are on site doing jobs that most Iranians would not do. The cementing and heavy lifting and all of that sort of thing. Young Pashtun boys, 18 and 19-year-old boys, most of them actually illegal. Some have papers, some don't, but they're eking out a living and at the mercy of rapacious companies who know that they can use them to the hilt. And of course, they have garnered a reputation for just being dismissed by the Iranian population at large, for fulfilling what is considered an unworthy task. There are no threat to Tehranis as such as either say pickpocketers or criminals or anything like that, but they are just disdained by Iranians. And of course, they are Muslims, true, and so much for the Islamic Republic, which doesn't talk about the welfare of these Muslims. Oh, and of course, the fact that they are Sunni Muslims also lends some credence to the inherent bias in how they are perceived. So the question is, they have been treated appallingly as other Muslims have been too. So it's no surprise, and they've been exploited and are continued exploited in the as a precariat in the unorganized labor sector across Iran, particularly as I mentioned in the construction industry.
Mr. Wagner, thank you for taking out the time and talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.